After approximately 6 years, a class action lawsuit filed against the CHL has finally been settled. It's been concluded that each CHL team will be responsible for paying around $250,000 in damages, that include back wages, OT pay, vacation pay, and punitive damages totaling about $30 million. Elliotte Friedman joined me right now. Full disclosure, should mention Sportsnet is a rights holder for the Canadian Hockey League, and we broadcast games regularly for some time. Elliotte, for people who are unfamiliar with this lawsuit, it kind of stems from the debate we hear a lot as it pertains to the NCAA about whether players are deemed student athletes or employees. And while this case rules in favor of the plaintiffs in that they're getting some sort of money, I want to start with the statement Ron Robinson, the WHL commissioner and vice president of the CHL, put out saying the league settled this lawsuit in the hopes of avoiding racking up more legal fees and for it to stop serving as a distraction, not that they necessarily agree with the plaintiffs in this case. Why was this important of a statement for him to put out?
Well, I think, and like we'd been working on this for a little bit, Faizal. We'd heard that there was a settlement. I actually didn't know until today that they'd agreed to it a few months ago and that it was just a matter of working it and finalizing it. I do believe that there were some people in the CHL who wanted to fight it. You know, since this lawsuit was filed in 2014, a number of provinces, all the provinces in Canada where the CHL is played, and a couple of states in the U.S. where it's played, Michigan and Washington State, had changed their laws or adapted their laws so that CHL players were accepted from regular work statutes. And there were some people who took that as we're on the right side of the law and we have to fight this. And then they realized they got legal advice. Apparently it would take about 5 years, at least, maybe 10, for this to run its way through the courts. And they had $30 million in insurance money, and they'd already burned through a good chunk of it. Yeah. So, I mean, it's your choice. Do you want to gamble, or do you want to just say, you know what, we'll make the deal that we know we have? And that's what they decided to do.
Do you read anything to the fact that the representation for the plaintiffs agreeing to the settlement as well, when the initial suit they were seeking was $180 million in damages, or was just a matter of just getting something, knowing that if this case did persist in court, they might not end up with anything?
Well, if you're a bad negotiator, Faizal, do you start by opening low, right?
Yeah.
So
true.
You always come
True.
in with the big number, and you say, okay, this is what we'd like to get in a perfect world with maybe something a little extra. And I think. The one thing about this that was pretty tough was that the people, the lawyers who were representing the plaintiffs and a lot of the top executives running the teams in the leagues, they weren't that helpful on this. They were really not willing to talk at all. So it was tough to figure out how it exactly would work. But I think everybody reached a point where the only people who were going to get rich were going to be the lawyers. So at that point in time, you kind of just say, okay, what's the best deal we both could make? And I think both sides will probably be happy with some stuff and disappointed about other stuff.
You just mentioned prior to this that provincial governments have stepped in their own rights. And it was notable that in 2016, it was the BC government that accepted the 6 major junior hockey league teams from paying minimum wage to WHL, tried to show that teams would fold as a result of having to do this. How damaging will the results of this lawsuit be to certain teams that aren't as financially stable to others, or will teams mostly be able to sustain having to pay out $250,000 approximately?
I think it's going to be a challenge to some people, Faizal, particularly because of what we're going through right now with COVID-19. Mm-hmm. From what I understand, and this confused some people, and I admit maybe I didn't write it as clearly as I could have when I initially wrote it. They had a $30 million insurance fund. I think a chunk of that money had already been used. I'm under the impression that the settlement they're paying is partially from that insurance fund and partially from the teams. And I've been told that each of the 60 teams is going to be responsible for about $250,000, maybe a little bit more. So I think that, for some teams, that's going to be an issue. And it would be an issue even before what we're going through, and it's going to be an issue even more now with what we're going through. So I think we're in a situation where, some teams, everyone's going to feel it. Some teams are going to be more affected than others.
We mentioned that, and then the details emerge again, that this was settled pre-COVID-19. So when Robinson puts out a statement that said they want to deter this from being a distraction. His assumption was that the league would continue to play and that they'd be prepping for the Memorial Cup, et cetera. A lot of teams rely on the gate revenues, playoff gate revenues specifically to help stay financially stable. They're not getting any gate revenue right now. They're probably not getting any gate revenue for a little while, considering what's going on in the world right now. Do you think as a result of this, some teams could end up folding and the leagues could get smaller in any kind of way, or is it too early to determine any of that?
I think it's probably too early. And I would be honest, Faizal, like the guys who would know the answers to those questions better are probably guys like Gare Joyce and Sam Cosentino and Jeff Merrick. They're much more in tune to it than I am. You know, the one thing I believe is if you take a look at hockey in North America, the ECHL, they're facing some challenges. The AHL, they're wondering about what their league's going to look like next year. The CHL is not exempt from all that. You know, you didn't mention the Memorial Cup. You know, the loss from the Memorial Cup, that's huge. That's huge from these teams, the fact that it didn't get played this year. So, you know, I do think, you know, I think that the answer, Faizal, we might not know it now. We might know it in a year or two.
Yeah.
What is the true outcome out of all of this?
I feel like that's a consistent statement to make about a lot of things
Yes.
right now. Is there any party that believes that the CHL should go to some sort of revenue sharing system, given how we know some teams make a lot of money and other teams really struggle to keep their teams together?
I'm sure that that's been discussed, but I would say that's out of my area of expertise.
I got to ask the question.
Yeah, of course. I mean, some people will tell you my area of expertise is pretty small.
No, I would vehemently disagree with that, Elliotte Friedman. Just to clarify, I think you said off the top as well, because I saw this question being asked on Twitter. Current players, future players, they won't have a chance to participate in lawsuits like this again because of the legislation put forth by provincial governments and states like Michigan and Washington. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. As far as I understand, it's been explained to me, and I did consult a couple of employment lawyers that I know, and they said yes, that the CHL has done its work, whether you agree with it or not. They have certainly done its work to close this situation.
And that is why, again, Elliotte, you shouldn't be knocking yourself. That's why you're so good at what it is you do. Elliotte Friedman, post up right now on sportsnet.ca outlining some of the details from the settlement of this class action lawsuit that's been about 6 years in the making between players and the Canadian Hockey League. Elliotte, I appreciate you doing this and continue to stay safe as always.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.